This video we're going to walk through how to create the frequency distributions, histograms, and pie charts in Excel. And here I've got my data on the left-hand side. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort it just to make my life easier. It's not necessary, but it will make things easier. So I highlight my data, I go to Home, come over here to Sort and Filter, and I'm going to custom sort. Make sure this headers option is clicked so that it knows that top row is all about headers. And I'm going to sort by test score, and here I can choose whether I want to go high to low or low to high. I'm just going to do low to high. And now I can see, okay, I've got it all sorted. Now, if I have a small set, I can easily do my frequency distribution based on this. Very simple. I can count, put in the numbers. But as my sets get larger, it's good to know how are the other ways. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the rest of my distribution chart here. So I'm going to double click between H and I just so I can see all my words. I'm going to do that between each of the columns. I'm just double clicking to make everything easier to see so that nothing's overlapped. Now my lower limit, if I look at my range, that's the lowest value in the range, and the upper limit's the upper value. So 0 and 68. Here, 69 and 76. Now, I can keep going in this regard, and after especially this first one, if I highlight these four, I could keep manually entering them, but I could also double click and you can see it'll fill in the rest of it because it's an equivalent value in between each of those categories. If I want my midpoint, which is sometimes just useful to have for my range, so that's just saying where's the middle of each of these values ranges, I can just do average, and I can highlight those two cells. And then I can do that for each of them, or I can always double click on that little box in the bottom right corner and it'll fill it in. For my frequencies, again, I said I could manually add them, but I can also use the frequency formula. So I'm going to use the frequency formula. So first thing, I'm going to highlight column B. I can highlight the entire column. It'll ignore the test score header. It's not a big deal. And then for my bins array, what I'm going to select is my upper limit. And what that means is it's going to say, in this specific column, anything that's 68 or below, it's going to count. Now I have to highlight it all more so to fill in the rest of my chart than because of the specific one here. So if I want to fill in the rest, I can't just double click on here and it'll fill it in. It doesn't work that way in Excel. Instead, what I have to do is I've got to click in the middle and highlight all of my columns that need frequency, all those cells. This is the key. Hit F2, and you can see that it highlights all my test scores as well as all my limits that are being used for my frequency. And then I have to hit 3 buttons. I'm going to hit Control, Shift, Enter, and then it fills in all those values for me. And I can double check each of them if I want. Now, I also would like to know, well, how many total did I have? So I want to write the word total here, and I can use the sum function to tell me how many total options did I actually have, how many frequencies were there. In this case, there were 29. And that's useful because if I want to know my relative frequency, in other words, what proportion of all of my grades fell into each of these categories, I can use that total to help me. So I'm going to take the frequency in that category, and I'm going to divide it by my total. Now, to make sure that this cell is used for every single one of these, after I click on it, I have to hit the F4 button, and that locks that specific value as my denominator. So that when I come here, I double click on that little square, and all of them are using the K9, which is this cell that has the 29. If I didn't lock it with that F4 option, this one, looking at D's, would be looking for this cell to divide by, and then C's would be looking at this cell. And it's because the way Excel always uses its formulas, it always uses the next cell and row unless something is locked, like this is. Now let's go in and create those histograms and whatnot. So if I want to create my histogram, I'm going to highlight my frequencies. I'm going to come up here to Insert. And there are multiple ways you can do this, but this is one of the easier ways. I could try recommended charts, but I know I want to make a histogram, so I'm going to come here to Columns, and I'm going to do a 2D column, the very first option. Now I'm going to click and drag it to get it off my data. And I can even narrow it if I want. I can use the diagonal and shrink it down if I think it's too big. Those are all options I have. Now, when I want to create a histogram, the easiest way to do that is to come up to Design and go to Quick Layout. The 8th option is a histogram, and it removes a lot of the other things that I don't want, while still leaving my titles for each of these. Now, some things that are kind of useful and kind of frustrating that they don't automatically show up is the idea like lines. I like to have lines on my histogram to help separate. So if I right-click, in this version of Excel, I have this option right here where I can just either change what color my histogram is, but I can also change the outline, which means I'll get the lines in between. I could choose any color I want. I'll just choose this orange. So now if I click to the side, I can see I have orange lines very easily split. So some other things I may want to change. And if you don't have that option, you can always right click and do Format Data Series. And under the Format Data Series, if you click on the thing that looks like a paint bucket, you're dealing with the border. And you want to make sure the solid line, and you can choose color. So there's always these additional ways of doing things. If there's other aspects you want in your chart, you can always click on this plus sign and choose them, or you can again go up to your format and design options. The next one there, just so you know, if you want to change your style, but we don't want to change the style because it'll change it back to a bar chart. And the bottom one here, this is the one that can be actually kind of useful because it allows me to change my data. And especially, I want to change my categories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doesn't tell me anything. So I can do select data, and I want to change those axis labels. So I click edit. And what to me would be the most useful is either using the range or using the grade letter. I'm going to use the grade letter, but I could choose either. It's not a big deal, and I could always go back and change it. I click OK, click OK again, and now look, it has each of my pieces here. Last thing to do is change those chart titles. So I can just click on each of them and double click, and I can just say this is test scores. I can double click and change this to frequency. Kind of hard to read sideways. And I'll change this to grade. Now, and there's my histogram, completely done. Now, the other thing I talked about wanting is a pie chart. And if I'm creating a pie chart, I'm creating that off of the relative frequencies. So I'm going to highlight my relative frequencies, come up to Insert, and this time I'm looking for the circle. And I just choose the very first one. It does what I need. There's other options, but this is probably the simplest one. And I'm going to shrink it down a little bit to make life a little bit easier. Now, just like before, I can change the design. So the design that I find to be easiest in that quick layout is having design 6, because it gives me the chart title and gives me each of the pieces as well as a key. Now, again, my legend, I would select data, and the data I want to use, I'm going to edit it again, is the grade. And I click OK. And I click OK again. Now, I can just keep it by color, but the problem is sometimes if you keep it by color, there are people like me who are colorblind. So what I do is I right-click on my data, and I'm going to format my data labels. And if I look here to the right, I have several options about label containing. And one of those is I can contain the percentage, the leader, or show leader lines, and I can also do the category name. And when I do category name, you can see that the grade shows up as well. And that can be useful, especially like I said, if the colors are kind of hard to see, or if you have someone that's colorblind. So now they can pay attention to both what is that category and what percent did it get. And again, change your item there to test scores, and you have all the aspects you may need for your pie chart. And again, there's many other things you can do and many other ways you can do it. This is just one of those ways that can quickly help.